sure to get my magic box here. You might not know this about me, but I took karate for a number of years growing up. And we went to the FBI Academy there in Quantico, and Miss Jo was a retired Marine in her 50s and probably could have fought a bear and won. And she taught us, but I remember being puzzled as my dad explained to me why we were doing this. It was kind of like, son, we're training to punch people really hard. Now, in general, you shouldn't fight people. But if you do, we want to make sure that you're able to hurt them real bad. And it continued, like the first time, they had me spar a girl. And I'm there like looking at the sidelines like, I'm not supposed to hit her. And then she kicked me in the stomach and knocked the wind out of me. And that settled that question forever for me. Now, my brother, I had no problem hitting whatsoever. Now, when we would do our practice fights, it turns into more of a cage fight. And then they're pulling it, us off of each other like, now they don't want us hitting each other. I told him, what better training could you ask for than to fight a sibling? So, as we talked through the importance of forgiveness and, being peacemakers, it raised for me kind of a follow-up question. What about war? What about violence? If we are followers of Jesus, is there ever a time when violence or war is called for? And this, in particular, in the history of our country, if you ever make the mistake of turning on the news, my goodness, it's very depressing. You have, in Burma right now, this people group, the Rohingyas, an ethnic minority. 1 million people denied citizenship. In the past month, the army in Burma has begun attacking their villages, burning their houses down, and killing them. And so 300,000 people have fled to the neighboring country. They've even sowed landmines along the border to catch them as they fled. Unfortunately, Bangladesh doesn't want them either, and so they're saying these 250,000 people, we're just going to push you back into the country where you came from. And so it asks the question, do we intervene? What do we do in a situation like this? In Syria right now, Bashar al-Assad has been using chemical weapons on civilians in his own country. This is something the world promised would never happen again. What do we do? In North Korea right now, a literal comic book villain has nuclear weapons and is trying to build up to the ability to strike the United States with them. Do we hit him first? How do we respond to situations like this? Now, I understand that nobody is flying out here to ask me, Pastor Aaron, what do we do to solve this? And they're not going to ask you either. We may get to voice our opinions indirectly through the people that we vote for, but during periods like this, I think it's very important for Christians to be vocal and saying, what does the Bible have to say about troubled times? Now, before I even started to this, and I always try and let you know, this is one of those topics that if you ask a variety of Christians, you will get a variety of answers. War, I think everybody, though, can agree that war is horrible. It is really a terrible thing, but it's also universal. If you look at human history, it is difficult to find any nation in all of human history that's gone longer than like 50 years without fighting a war of some kind. It has just been a constant. In fact, in the world right now, there are 4 major wars, 11 smaller wars, and about 30 minor conflicts. We fight wars for all kinds of reasons. Some of them are very foolish. There is the War of Jenkins' Ear, which began England against Spain that started in 1739. There's an English guy who got his ear cut off by a Spaniard. And they said, you know what, let's fight a war about this. and eventually grew into a greater conflict involving much of Europe, and 500,000 people died. So, is there ever a good reason to fight? Let's begin in the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Later on in the same sermon, Jesus says this, "You have heard it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." Now, I taught on this last week, or the week before, with some of the students, and I actually demonstrated. I invited one of the students up, and I, as Jesus described, did him one of those on one cheek, and we talked about how difficult it was for him to offer the other to me as well. Now, I've heard, this verse referred to in all kinds of different ways. I've heard some people refer to the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and say, you know what? We, as the United States, should get back at other countries that treat us unfairly. And I've heard other people refer to the second part of it and say, if we really took Jesus seriously, we would just disband our military entirely. So we have to be very careful as we look at these verses. Now let's start with the first part. Eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Jesus here, he refers to the Old Testament. And there is part of the Mosaic law that we tend to think of in the wrong way. We hear eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, and we think man, that is a brutal form of justice. But during that period, before nation states, before police forces, what you tend to have happen was a cycle of violence and revenge. So let's say you had somebody, they come to you, and they cut your ear off. Now, it tended to happen in a tribal system. You wouldn't go to them and try and take their ear off. No, you would take an arm and a leg. And so then they would go and they would kill your whole family. And before you know it, you've got Hatfields versus McCoys. Everybody is fighting. And so it is to that kind of a world that God said, no, you cannot take revenge more than was done to you. It was actually a limiting law. You're limited to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, Jesus speaks many years later. And it's very clear from what he says that we cannot take personal revenge. Someone slaps you, the word there indicates a backhanded slap, a public insult. If you're going to follow Jesus, you cannot take personal revenge. But it's hard to say, beyond that, what he would have to say about fighting wars and having a military. Because the Jewish people that he's talking to, they're all private citizens, and they're living in a country that has no military whatsoever. And so we can ask ourselves, well, what would he say to a Marine? What would he say to somebody in the Air Force? Now, the Jewish people, they hated anybody who cooperated with the evil Roman Empire. Tax collectors, and they really didn't like Jews who would serve in the military. Because you're not serving in the Jewish military, you're serving in the evil Roman Empire military, and your job involves killing. John the Baptist was approached by some soldiers. And they asked him, "And what should we do?" You can tell they felt conflicted about their position. They're like, "Look, my job, I carry a sword for a reason. And it's not to tickle people with it." And so they come in and say, "What should we do?" And his response is interesting. He replied, "Don't extort money and don't accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay." I find that amazing. If you could imagine, if you're a soldier for a country like Cuba or Venezuela, there's a dictator and he's going to give you commands that you may or may not agree with. Jesus interacts with soldiers several times. And you never find him, a centurion comes to him, you never find him saying, "If you're going to follow me, you have to leave the army." In fact, the centurion, he commends his faith. Matthew the tax collector left being a tax collector to follow Jesus. Zacchaeus gave back everything that he had cheated people out of. But Jesus never demands this of a soldier. In North Carolina, we had a lot of military friends, and often found opportunity to remind them that in the Old Testament, the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, really means thou shalt not murder. There are two different words. There's a different law in the book of Exodus that deals with using physical violence. Exodus 22, 2 and 3. If a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. So let me tell you, if you're awakened in the middle of the night and somebody is breaking into your house, and you're one of, let's face it, everybody around here who has a gun, and you shoot the person fearing for your life and they die, God does not hold you accountable for their life. But if you wait until the next morning and you track them down and find them at McDonald's and you shoot them, that's murder. So it makes it clear there's a difference. If your life is in danger, they're breaking in the middle of the night, and in self-defense, you kill them, God does not hold you accountable for that. But if your life is not in danger, and you're finding them the next day, that's more about revenge than anything. And we have a hard time with that sometimes. I saw, about a year ago, people began sharing this video online of people driving cars and ramming into protesters blocking the streets. Now, I'll admit, if I was stuck in traffic, I'm just sitting there, people are standing in the road like linking hands, that's annoying. You can disagree with what they do. But if your response is to take your vehicle and at a high speed run them over, you're trying to kill someone, that's murder. If someone is attacking you, though, it's a different story. Now, can we take this same concept of defending yourself and apply it to other innocent people who are in danger? There's actually 32 countries in the world that have no army whatsoever. Now, we hear that number and we say, oh, that's surprising, why can't we do that? But a lot of them are smaller countries like the Vatican. This statue is in Costa Rica. And after they had a bloody civil war, they disbanded their military. But Costa Rica depends on other countries to have armies to protect them in case they get attacked. Let's just say South Korea, for instance, decided to do this and say, we don't really need an army whatsoever, and they publicly disband them, replace them with groups of hippies and garlands of flowers. What do you think North Korea is going to do? I mean, things are going to get ugly pretty quickly. Somebody comes into your house in the middle of the night, you might be able to scare them off, punch them in the nose, kick them in the shins, use a non-violent method of subduing them. That might be possible. But if you have one country invading another country, you can't kick enough people in the shins to stop that from happening. At some point, violence and death is going to be involved. Isaiah 1:17 says this, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. This is again addressed to individuals, but when we think about wars like World War II, where the Jewish people are being exterminated, how can you sit by and watch something like that happen and do nothing? Pastor Steve was the lead pastor of the church in North Carolina that I served in. And he was a unique guy. More than 6 feet tall, towering, lanky, goofy, and a hugger. He was a gentle guy. I have a hard time even thinking of seeing him frown. And I remember talking to him and said, I used to think that I was a pacifist. He said, I even told my wife, honey, if somebody broke in the middle of the night and all I had was a gun to stop them, I'm sorry, even if they were killing you, I don't think I could pull the trigger. He said that changed for me, though, when we were missionaries and they were somewhere in Asia. And they went into a store and they bought some camera parts that turned out to be cheap knockoffs and they broke. So they bring the camera parts back to the store and they're explaining to them, you sold us fakes. And they're saying, no, we didn't. They're saying, yes, you did. And they're telling other people in the store, hey, don't buy stuff here, they're fake. And the guy presses a button underneath the counter, and 3 people, they might have been ninjas, come out of a back room and kind of do the firmly escort Pastor Steve out of the store and into the street. And they're kind of pushing him down the street. His wife is still in the store. And she said the owner of the asylum gets very agitated. He starts yelling at her, and he slams his fist down and breaks the glass counter in front of her. Her husband is down the street. She has no idea what to do. And she said, I just did the first thing that came to mind. She started screaming at the top of her voice. Pastor Steve out on the sidewalk. Here, he has no idea what's going on inside the store. He hears his wife scream. He said, never before in my life had I been tempted to violence. He said, what I did at that moment, though, is I ran through those 3 guys and into the store, and I had violence on my mind if they would stand in my way. Now, those 3 ninjas, of course, seeing this big American charging at them, stepped out of the way. They made it out safely, and nobody got hurt. But it's just interesting to me that in that moment, knowing that his wife was powerless and possibly in danger, his mind was changed. And yet, just because we can step in and use force doesn't mean that we always should. Now, if we were Costa Rica, we could look at all those problems in the world and say, like, wow, that's really bad, about the Rohingyas. We don't have a military, we can't do anything. But as the United States, we spend as much on our military, it's about equal to what the rest of the world combined spends. So we have the ability to step into pretty much any conflict in the world right now with overwhelming force and bomb everyone. Should we? Matthew chapter 26, Jesus is being betrayed. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions, one of the other gospel writers tells us it was Peter, no shock there, reached for a sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Now I imagine for Peter, in this moment, he is defending the only innocent person ever to have lived. He had just told Jesus, I'll follow you to death. He knew it was dangerous. That's why he brought a sword with him. He gets to put his words into action. Good thing he had that concealed carry permit. And just as he starts swinging, and it kind of misses him, and it seems awkward to me. I've never attacked somebody with a sword, but to hit him just right, and he only gets the ear, and he's probably going to finish him off and really get going, and Jesus stops him. Put your sword back in its place, Jesus said. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Now, some things cannot be solved by violence. In fact, I'd say a great many things. If your computer breaks, shooting it might make you feel better, but it's not going to solve your problem. Jesus went willingly to his death. And it wasn't because he was weak. It wasn't because, as he told Peter, it wasn't because he couldn't instantly call down armies of angels to defend him. He was carrying out the Father's plan. So he tells Peter, some translations say, all who live by the sword will die by the sword. If that is the way that you live, if you imagine somebody carrying around a hammer all day, every day, they're going to begin looking for ways to solve whatever issue by using that hammer. It says if you do the same with violence, if you're looking to solve every problem by violence, if that sword is out at every argument, then you're going to die like that. One of the problems that we face with having a powerful military is it becomes easy to think that drone strikes and SEAL teams and nuclear weapons can solve every issue that we face. James 1:20 says that human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Now, it is a good thing to defend the innocent. It is permissible to defend ourselves. And yet, as a Christian, we have to understand the wars that God desires for us to fight are generally not the ones that can be fought with guns. I was talking with a student, and one of the most frequent questions I get asked, I'm not sure why, when I'm a substitute teacher, actually has little to do with God. It's, what do you think about gun control? And I usually deflect. But I was talking with him, and he said, well, I carry a gun with me. It's in my truck. I can't bring it in school. And he said, it's very important to me that I'm ready to defend the innocent if I ever need to. And I said, that is good. I said, however, I found in my life, my greatest problems cannot be solved that way. My greatest threats aren't going to be somebody barging into my house in the middle of the night. If I'm honest, the greatest threats to me come from within. They're my own desires. Jesus calls me to take up my cross, to crucify my flesh, to wage war against the evil desires inside myself. I'm a decent shot with a gun, but I want to be far better at handling the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Now, I apologize if, when I began talking about this, you were expecting me at the end of the message to go down through all those conflicts and tell you, here's what God wants to do here, and here's what God wants to do there. I'm sorry, I can't do that for you this morning. But what I can tell you is that all of this underscores the importance of praying for our leaders. These are decisions, I'll be honest with you, I'm glad I don't have to make, and I would never want to be in that position to have my finger on the Bible. What we are called to do as Christians, as far as it's up to us, we're to live in peace with people. If necessary, we defend the innocent. And we are called to pray for those who are in positions of authority. So if you're one of the many people right now who feels anxious about the state of the world, I hope that it drives you first and foremost to pray that God's guiding hand would be on those who lead us. Let's do that right now. God, it can be unsettling to see this constant fighting that so many countries are involved in, and sometimes our hearts, we just long for peace, and peace doesn't come. We see the innocent being abused, the poor and the powerless, and they're in situations of great needs. And sometimes we say, what can we do? And we say, well, we can't solve every problem. And God, we know that you are great enough to do that. I pray that in our own lives, more than anything, Lord, that you would remind us that our weapons are not physical, that we are to wage war in the Spirit. God, I pray for those who are in the military, and for them it's a very personal question of the decisions that are being made that they have to follow through on. God, I pray right now for our president, for those in Congress, for other leaders around the world as they respond to situations as they come up. God, that you would help them not to make decisions based on what polling numbers might think or in self-interest, but God, that they would act according to the wisdom that you alone can provide. That you would guide their hands in their decisions. God, help us to have peace in uncertain times, knowing that you are the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords, and that you have this whole world in your hands. In Jesus' name.